7 months after the divorce, Lucas unexpectedly saw Madeline in the middle of a crowded square. She was wearing a simple dress, one hand gently resting on her clearly rounded belly. In an instant, his world came crashing down. Back then, he had been the one to force her to end the pregnancy. She had silently nodded, coldly saying, "I'll do as you say." He believed her, then walked away. From that moment, he thought he had lost everything. The child who never had the chance to take a first breath, and the woman who had once loved him with her whole heart. For 7 months, Lucas lived in a state of emptiness, consumed daily by regret. But now the truth was laid bare. Madeline had never gone through with the abortion. She had left in silence, choosing to raise that tiny life on her own. What had he lost? A wife, a child, a home that had once been within his reach, but one he had never known how to cherish. Hey, Soul Stories fam. We're about to begin a brand new love journey. Comment where you're watching from so we can see that our Soul Stories family is all around the world. The mansion sat on the edge of town, set apart from the lively laughter beyond its gates. Inside, dinner went on as usual, two people seated across from each other, a long dining table stretching between them, and a silence so heavy that the clink of silverware against porcelain sounded almost chilling. Lucas sat upright, his gaze empty, occasionally lifting a forkful of food without really tasting it. At the other end of the table, Madeline bowed her head slightly, her small hands carefully arranging food onto his plate. She carried out this task with steady regularity, as if it were a deeply ingrained habit, even though she knew he would never offer so much as a grateful smile. The luxurious home, with its high ceilings and large glass windows, its gleaming leather chairs, should have been filled with the warmth of family life. Instead, it exuded only coldness, resembling a showroom more than a home. Lucas wasn't exactly cruel, but ever since childhood, he had grown up in the shadow of his father, a domineering, cold man who always regarded emotions as weakness. His father often said, "A man doesn't need love. Marriage is a duty. You pick a decent girl, have children, and that's it. Everything else only wears you down." Lucas heard those words repeatedly throughout his youth, to such an extent that when he became an adult, he no longer knew what real love even meant. And when his father arranged the marriage with Madeline, a gentle, obedient young woman from a suitable family, Lucas didn't protest. He accepted it as if signing a contract, not beginning a shared life. In stark contrast, Madeline stepped into the marriage with trust and genuine love. She truly loved Lucas, not for his family background or his wealth, but because she believed in the sternness of his eyes, believing that deep inside was a heart waiting to be awakened. Every morning she prepared his coffee exactly the way he liked it. Every evening, she tried to start small conversations about the neighbors planting flowers or the book she had just finished, but his responses were nothing more than distracted nods or worse, complete silence. Sometimes Madeline smiled to herself and whispered inwardly, "One day he'll change. One day he'll recognize my love." But with each passing day, that hope flickered out bit by bit, like a candle snuffed by the draft in a cold room. Inside the mansion, silence wasn't just the absence of sound. It was a living presence, creeping into every room, filling the entire space. When Lucas walked past Madeline without glancing at her, when meals ended without a single word of thanks, the silence only grew thicker. Madeline tried to fill the emptiness with tenderness. She hung light-colored curtains, placed fresh flowers in crystal vases, and tucked little notes into his jacket pocket, saying, "I dreamed of you smiling last night," or, "The weather is so lovely today, I wish we could take a walk together." Lucas read them, kept them, but never once replied. He didn't despise her words. They only left him with a choking sense of guilt, as if he owed something he could never repay. And instead of facing it, he chose silence. Each evening after dinner, Lucas would retreat to his study, burying himself in papers or sitting still with a glass of wine in hand. Madeline sat on the porch, listening to the wind sweeping through the garden. They lived under the same roof, yet seemed to inhabit two entirely separate worlds. At times, Lucas would glance at her figure under the soft glow of the porch light. A small part of him wanted to walk over, to say something, but his father's words always echoed in his mind. "Love only makes you weak. Don't let it rule you." And so he turned away, letting yet another chance slip by. That night was no different. After dinner, Lucas sat with an open book before him, though his eyes didn't read a single word. Madeline quietly cleared the table, the faint clatter of dishes the only sound in the house. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, its murmur like distant whispers. Madeline looked up at her husband. He sat motionless, calm and detached, as if the world itself could never touch him. A fleeting sadness crossed her eyes before she lowered her gaze again and continued her task. Within the walls of that mansion, there was too much silence. Silences longer than any conversation, deeper than any wound. And day by day, hour by hour, those silences were quietly pushing the two of them farther apart. Madeline no longer knew how much strength she had left to keep waiting. Lucas still thought he didn't need love, but what neither of them realized was that every silence was laying the foundation for a tragedy that could never be undone. That night, heavy rain suddenly poured down, the sound of it lashing against the glass windows, making the already cold mansion feel even more desolate. Madeline sat curled up in the living room, her head spinning, her forehead burning hot. Since morning, she had felt her body weakening, yet she still forced herself to prepare dinner and tidy the house as usual. She didn't want Lucas to worry, didn't want him to feel burdened by her, but when she stood up to put away the last dish, her legs suddenly gave out. Her whole body trembled, cold sweat breaking out as her breath grew heavy. She bit her lip, trying to steady herself, but the darkness quickly clouded her vision. Lucas heard the noise and turned around. He saw his wife clutching her forehead, shaking violently, her face pale as if drained of all blood. His chest tightened and a sudden fear surged through him, a feeling he thought he had long forgotten. "Madeline!" he shouted, his voice hoarse and filled with panic. Without thinking, Lucas rushed over and caught her frail body before it collapsed onto the cold floor. He had never seen Madeline so fragile. His hand touched her burning skin, and for the first time in years, he felt true fear. Lucas hurried to find medicine, but the cabinet held nothing useful. Outside, the storm raged on, rain pounding and wind howling. He grabbed a raincoat and dashed into the night. The streets were deserted, and only the drumming of rain against rooftops remained. He ran almost frantically to the only pharmacy still open, his body soaked through. When he returned, Lucas was out of breath, clutching a bag of medicine and clean towels. He carefully laid Madeline on the bed, placed a warm cloth on her forehead, wiped away the sweat, and kept changing the towel repeatedly. All night he never once took his eyes off her. In the dim glow of the lamp, Madeline's face was flushed with fever, her lips softly murmuring his name in unconsciousness. Lucas gripped her small hand tightly, listening to every labored breath, his heart twisting in pain. What have I been doing all these years? Why have I never paid this much attention to her before? He asked himself, but the only answer was a hollow void. He changed the towel, brushed back her sweat-soaked hair, and whispered words that startled even himself as they left his lips. "You'll be all right. I'm here. I won't go anywhere." That night was longer than any night Lucas had ever known. The rain never ceased, but inside the small room, the sound of Madeline's breathing was the only thing he cared about. Gradually, she sank into a deeper sleep, her breaths evening out, her cheeks no longer burning. Lucas sat still, letting her rest her head against his chest. He didn't dare move, as if one blink might shatter the fragile peace of the moment. For the first time, he realized his arms could protect someone, and for the first time, his heart stirred a feeling he had buried long ago. Lucas lifted his gaze to the ceiling, his thoughts in turmoil. He couldn't define what he felt. Was it pity, duty, or something deeper he had always tried to deny? By dawn, the storm had cleared, the sky now bright and clear as if no storm had ever passed. Madeline slowly opened her eyes. The first thing she saw was Lucas's face, his eyes rimmed dark from staying up all night, his hand still clasping hers tightly. Her heart clenched. In that moment, she felt loved, or at least needed. A faint smile appeared on her lips. "You stayed up all night?" Her voice was hoarse. Lucas quickly released her hand, standing up as if afraid of being caught. He turned away, hiding the emotions that had slipped out in the night. "If you're feeling better, just rest some more." "I need to go to the office." The words cut through the fragile hope like a cold blade. Madeline quietly nodded, hiding her disappointment. When the door closed behind Lucas, the room fell silent once more. She stared at the ceiling, emotions surging inside her. She remembered the warmth of his hand holding hers through the night, remembered his voice whispering, "I'm here." Though he had returned to his cold demeanor this morning, she knew that somewhere deep in his heart, there was still something left for her. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "Maybe he still has some feelings for me. Maybe I shouldn't give up." Outside the window, sunlight filtered into the room, casting light on her weary but hopeful face. A fragile ray of hope, yet enough for Madeline to keep going. In the days following the fever, the mansion looked the same as ever. Soaring ceilings, stark white walls, tall windows opening to the blue sky. But to Madeline, everything felt different. Inside her flickered a fragile hope that after that stormy night, Lucas would change. That maybe finally he had felt the love she had poured out for so many years. Yet that hope dimmed slowly, cruelly, like a candle smothered by wind in a room without doors. Lucas began coming home later. He had excuses ready. Work at the office, a dinner with clients, or sometimes no explanation at all. But Madeline noticed how his eyes always faltered, lingering on some invisible point, as if even he didn't believe his own words. Not every night was truly busy. Often after leaving the office, Lucas drove aimlessly through suburban roads, circling streets lit with neon, before veering into dark, empty lanes, just to delay the moment of returning to the house where Madeline waited. In his mind, a silent war raged. On one side, his father's voice echoes, "Love is only duty. Don't let yourself grow weak." On the other hand, the image of Madeline trembling in the rain, burning with fever, her lips calling his name. That memory choked him, yet whenever he drew close, fear held him back. He knew he was a coward, and to hide it, he chose to run. At first, Madeline still slipped little notes into his pockets, but when those scraps kept disappearing without a single reply, her hands grew hesitant. One morning as she brewed coffee, she stared at the empty second cup. Before, even knowing he never praised her, she had faithfully prepared it his way. A touch more bitter, a hint of cinnamon, a swirl of milk froth. But that morning she quietly poured only one cup for herself, then sat by the window, staring at the lifeless garden. The feeling was strange, as though a taut string inside her had finally snapped. She no longer had the strength to hold on with such small gestures. Whenever Lucas came home, it felt as though there was a third presence in the house, silence itself. It sat at their table, followed their footsteps, seeped into every room. It grew so dense that the clink of a spoon against porcelain sounded sharp, like a blade. Madeline no longer asked, "How was your day?" Lucas no longer pretended to answer. "Fine." They simply sat there, two shadows facing each other, letting the emptiness stretch between them. Sometimes their eyes met, only to dart away again, like strangers. The grand mansion, which should have been filled with voices and laughter, had become a mausoleum. Lucas wasn't oblivious. Each time he walked in and saw the flowers Madeline had arranged, now wilted, and saw only one cup of coffee on the table, he knew everything was slipping away. Yet instead of speaking, he stayed silent like a man bound by invisible chains. On his wandering night drives, he often turned the radio on, only to switch it off immediately. Music only made the guilt sharper. He asked himself, "Am I capable of love? Or am I just my father's replica, a man who knows duty but not tenderness?" When he thought of Madeline, part of him wanted to turn back, to hold her and whisper, "I'm sorry, don't let go." But the moment always passed, crushed under the rigid teachings of his father, which twisted every feeling into weakness to be buried. One night, Madeline sat on the porch, the wind threading through her hair, her eyes lost in the heavy black sky. She had once believed that patience alone would make him realize, but now she wondered, what am I waiting for? A door that will never open? The love notes were gone. The morning coffee was brewed for one. Madeline's gentle smile still lingered, but it had become a mask to hide a heart bleeding in silence. She didn't blame Lucas, but deep down she knew, no matter how great, the love of one person could never fill the emptiness of two. And so the distance grew. Not because of fights, but because of silence. Not because of hatred, but because of indifference. Lucas still lived in that house. Madeline still moved within it, breathing, forcing faint smiles. But they were like two parallel worlds with no point of contact left. In the depths of their hearts, both knew an invisible abyss had opened within the mansion. And if no one crossed it, if no hand reached out, the day would come when that abyss consumed everything. That evening's dinner was nothing out of the ordinary. A long table draped in a white cloth featured familiar dishes that Madeline had prepared. Cream of mushroom soup, beef stew with potatoes, and a loaf of freshly baked bread still warm to the touch. A vase of carnations sat in the center of the table, the flowers she had chosen, believing Lucas might appreciate their simplicity. He sat across from her, just as he always did, silent, eyes fixed on his glass of red wine, his face expressionless. The sound of cutlery scraping against porcelain rang dry and hollow, echoing into the silence as if it were falling into a bottomless pit. Madeline carefully poured more wine into his glass, trying to smile, but he didn't lift his head. Then, without warning, Lucas slammed his fork down. The sharp clatter cut through the air like a cold blade. "Let's get a divorce." Madeline froze, her hand still on the bottle of wine. She thought she had misheard. Her wide eyes searched his face for a correction, a faint smile to brush it off as a slip of the tongue. But Lucas didn't look away. His gaze was direct, detached, as if he had just stated something obvious. "I never loved you." The words came out slowly, cold as steel. No hesitation, no tremor. In that moment, it felt to Madeline as if her entire world exploded. The days of waiting, the nights spent writing little notes, the countless mornings she had brewed his coffee, all shattered, like glass falling onto a stone floor. Her heart pounded so hard it nearly choked her, but outwardly, her face remained unnervingly calm. No sobs burst out. No words of blame. Madeline quietly set the bottle down, drawing in a long breath to steady her trembling hands. She refused to let him see her fall apart. She refused to let him think her love was weakness. Inside, her heart was splintering. Every shard cut deep into her chest, each breath scorching with pain. Yet she swallowed it all down, keeping her lips steady. Lucas sat in silence after the confession. He had expected Madeline to cry, to plead, to rage, but she didn't. She simply sat there, staring at her plate as though deciding how best to clear it away. No sobbing, no questions. And it was precisely that calm that unsettled him, made him almost panicked. He took another sip of wine, trying to gather courage to keep up the facade of coldness. But when his eyes flickered back to Madeline, he noticed how red her eyes were, not from tears spilling over, but from tears ruthlessly held back. The sight made something twist inside him, but he quickly turned away, afraid of his own weakness. Dinner ended in suffocating silence. Madeline stood, carefully clearing each dish. Her movements remained steady, unhurried, as though she had been preparing for this moment all along. Lucas watched her, his heart unsteady. He wanted her to smash a plate, to scream at him, to do anything fierce enough so he wouldn't feel like the only one at fault. But Madeline didn't. She placed the dish in the sink, turned on the faucet, and let the water gush loudly, drowning out the unbearable silence in the room. Droplets splashed, breaking apart like muffled sobs forced to stay hidden. Madeline stood there for a long while, her back straight, her shoulders trembling faintly. Her hand gripped the plate so tightly her knuckles turned white, before she finally let it slip into the soapy water. When she turned back, her eyes were dry. No tears fell, but the light in them was gone. "I understand." Her voice was soft, almost a sigh. Lucas wanted to say more, but the words wouldn't come. That calm nod, that unresisting acceptance, made him feel as though he had just lost something far more precious than he could ever replace. Yet he stayed seated, his face cold and unmoving. Inside, his heart was torn apart, but his reason screamed, "Don't be weak." This is the right choice. Madeline walked slowly to the bedroom, closing the door behind her. Lucas was left alone in the vast dining room, the ticking of the clock and the sharp scent of wine his only companions. That night, Madeline sat on the bed, clutching a pillow, her eyes fixed on the emptiness ahead. No tears fell, but her entire body felt petrified. Memories surged. The smile on their wedding day, the hope of a home together, the mornings she brewed coffee while waiting for him. All of it now reduced to one merciless sentence. I never loved you. Her heart was shattered, but within the pain, a quiet truth emerged. She couldn't go on like this forever. A marriage built only on duty and devoid of love was bound, sooner or later, to end. As for Lucas, he sat alone in his study that night, his glass empty and refilled again. He tried to convince himself that he had just freed them both. But every time he closed his eyes, Madeline's red-rimmed gaze returned, stabbing into him like a rusted knife. 2 days after that cruel conversation, Madeline sensed something different in her body. She felt constantly tired, dizzy. Her sense of taste had altered. And most telling of all, her monthly cycle had suddenly stopped. A deep intuition stirred within her, trembling yet glimmering with hope. That afternoon, while Lucas was still out, Madeline quietly walked to the pharmacy in town. The air was crisp, the wind tugging at the thin scarf around her neck. She walked quickly, her hand clutching her coat pocket, her heartbeat racing. Inside her handbag, a small pregnancy test felt as though it carried the weight of her entire destiny. Back in the bathroom, she locked the door tightly. Her hands shook violently as she opened the box, her heart pounding against her ribs. When the second line slowly appeared, she choked back a sob and collapsed onto the floor. 2 red lines, clear, undeniable. For a moment, Madeline broke down in tears, but they weren't only tears of fear. In her shimmering eyes, a light, a spark of hope, shone. A life, a small miracle born in the ruins of a dying marriage. She placed her hand gently over her stomach, whispering as though to herself, "Baby, I'm not alone anymore." That evening, Lucas came home late. Madeline waited for him in the living room, the test hidden in her pocket. Her face was pale, but her eyes shone with fierce resolve. When Lucas removed his coat, she stood and spoke, her voice trembling but steady. "Lucas, I'm pregnant." The room froze. Lucas stiffened, his eyes widening as though he had just heard a death sentence. He took a step back, forcing a strained, bitter laugh. No, that's impossible. Are you sure?" Madeline nodded, her hand still resting on her belly, as if shielding the tiny life inside from her husband's icy gaze. Lucas clutched his head, pacing, then suddenly stopped. His voice cracked, sharp and urgent. "Get rid of it! We're over. I can't carry another burden. This is a mistake, Madeline." Madeline stayed silent. She looked directly into his eyes, no tears, no begging, only a slow, deliberate nod. "All right, I'll take care of it." Lucas exhaled heavily, as if relieved of a weight. He turned away, never seeing the fire burning in Madeline's dry eyes that gleamed with unshakable resolve. Inside, she whispered, "No, I won't give up my child. Even if I'm alone, I'll keep this baby. This isn't a mistake. This is the gift fate has given me." That night, Madeline lay on her side, hand over her belly, listening to Lucas's steady breathing from across the room. Her heart shattered at his ruthless words, yet beneath the pain was a rare strength. She imagined the baby's eyes, the curve of a smile. She pictured those first steps, the sound of a small voice calling her, "Mama," in a house that now held only silence. In the dark, Madeline whispered to the tiny life, "You're mine. Even if no one else welcomes you, I will keep you, I promise." As for Lucas, when Madeline agreed to the abortion, a strange sense of relief swept over him, like he had erased an unwanted obligation. But as he lay down, emptiness crept in, making it impossible to sleep. He didn't know why his chest tightened whenever he remembered Madeline's calm gaze. Not pleading, not broken, but terrifyingly calm. What Lucas failed to realize was that in that silence, Madeline had already made a monumental choice, a choice that would change both their fates forever. The next morning, Madeline brewed a weak cup of tea instead of coffee. She sat by the window, her hand resting on her stomach. The sky outside was gray, raindrops still clinging to the garden leaves. But in her eyes, a seed had already sprouted. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew she had to keep moving forward for her child, for the love she had once given everything to, and for the new life growing inside her fragile body. The world outside was silent, but in her heart, Madeline carved an unbreakable vow. You will be born. I will protect you with my entire life, even if it means facing every storm alone. The morning was gray, the sky heavy with clouds. No sunlight, only a dim, colorless light spilling over the road that led to the small clinic on the edge of town. Lucas drove, his face stern, his eyes fixed forward, not bothering to say a word. Madeline sat in the passenger seat, clutching her handbag tightly, her palms damp with sweat. In her mind, her heartbeat pounded. I'm about to lie, but it's the only lie that can protect my child. The car stopped. Lucas got out first and opened the door for her. The gesture, once meaningful, was now just an empty shell, stripped of all affection. Madeline nodded faintly and stepped into the clinic. The old doctor, a family friend, looked at her with surprise. Trembling, Madeline grabbed his hand, whispering urgently, I can't give up this baby, but please let me stay here for a while. The doctor froze. He looked deeply into her eyes, filled with despair, yet burning with an unshakable resolve. After a long silence, he sighed and gave a small nod. All right, stay here as long as you need. Tears welled in Madeline's eyes as she whispered, Thank you. Outside in the hallway, Lucas sat with arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the white wall. Time crawled, each tick of the clock deliberate, dragging. Inside him rose a strange mix of emotions. Relief, emptiness, and the nagging sense that he was losing something he couldn't even name. Meanwhile, Madeline lay in the resting room, cradling her belly, pressing her cheek against the cold bedsheet. She closed her eyes and whispered to the tiny life within her, My child, I never abandoned you. I'll protect you, no matter the cost. Silent tears slid down, soaking into the pillow. When the door opened, Madeline emerged looking pale and drained. She bowed her head slightly, her hand instinctively pressing against her stomach, before quickly dropping it so Lucas wouldn't notice. Lucas shot up, striding toward her. His eyes swept over her wan face. It's done? His voice was rough, strained. Madeline hesitated for a beat, then raised her head, locking her gaze with his. Her lips pressed together before releasing 3 words. It's over now. The words were cold, final, like a knife slicing through her own heart. Lucas froze. He nodded, asking nothing further. A nod heavy with relief, but in the depth of his eyes flickered a trace of something else. An emptiness, almost disappointment. On the drive back, neither spoke. The car rolled down streets littered with fallen leaves, silent as a funeral for something long dead. That night, Madeline sat in her room, the desk lamp casting a pale glow on her ashen face. Before her lay the divorce papers that Lucas had prepared weeks before. She picked up the pen and signed slowly, each stroke of her handwriting bleeding pain. Beside the papers lay a small note. In trembling yet clear letters she wrote, I wish you peace, even without me. No reproach, no bitterness, just a quiet farewell, a period at the end of a chapter. Madeline folded the note and placed it beside the papers. Then she opened the drawer and pulled out a small suitcase. Inside were only a few clothes, some savings, and the pregnancy test with 2 bright lines, the only proof of the secret she carried. At midnight, when Lucas had sunk into heavy sleep after several glasses of wine, Madeline quietly dragged the suitcase down the stairs. The faint sound of wheels against the wooden floor echoed, but not enough to wake him. She paused at the threshold, turning back to look at the mansion one last time. Memories surged, mornings brewing coffee, love notes hidden away, naive hopes. Now all that remained was emptiness. Taking a deep breath, she placed her hand on her stomach and whispered, Let's go, my child. This is the beginning of our new life. She opened the door and stepped outside. The night wind bit cold against her skin, but inside Madeline, a flame ignited the flame of resolve and love. The highway split the night like a silver thread. The night bus rattled on, its heavy engine blending with the dry winds of the desert. Madeline sat in the back row, clutching her small suitcase, a wool scarf pulled tightly over her head. Each time the bus hit a pothole, her body swayed. She placed her hand over her belly, whispering as though soothing a sleeping child, It's all right, sweetheart. We're almost there. Outside the window, the sky blazed with countless stars, a sky she rarely looked up to in the city. Out here, the silence was different. Not the suffocating silence of Lucas's mansion, but one that embraced like open arms. And Madeline realized perhaps she had been mishearing silence all along. In that house, silence was a wall. Here, silence was the sky itself. The bus stopped at a small roadside station, its sign creaking in the wind. The smell of strong coffee and freshly baked cornbread drifted from a roadside diner. Madeline stepped down, breathing in the dry earth, the dust, and the warm scent of corn, which felt unfamiliar yet comforting. She ordered a cup of warm milk, her hand still resting on her belly. The server smiled knowingly, asking nothing, and quietly slipped a thin slice of lemon into her water, as if understanding the subtle nausea of a pregnant woman. By the time the bus left the stop, the night was wearing thin. The road into the small village on the edge of New Mexico narrowed, streetlights growing sparse. When the driver called out, "Last stop," Madeline pulled her suitcase down, the wheels scraping softly against the packed dirt. Before her stretched a red dirt path, flanked by tall cacti standing silent, like guardians of the desert. Her grandmother's house, Mrs. Morales, stood behind a hedge of hibiscus. The plastered walls had faded, the tin roof dulled with age, and on the porch hung a string of dried red chilies, like prayer beads of the land. Madeline paused at the wooden gate, her fingers hovering over the latch. Her hands trembled, not from fear of rejection, but because after so many years of forcing strength, she was about to allow herself to be weak. The door creaked open, spilling warm yellow light onto the porch. Her grandmother stood there, small and slightly stooped, her silver hair tied in a bun, a half-finished needlework project still in her hand. She gazed at Madeline for a long time, asked no questions, then touched her cheek with rough, ember-warm fingers. "Come in, my girl," she whispered, as though afraid of waking someone in the night. In the kitchen, the kettle hissed on the wood stove. The scent of hot tortillas, lightly sautéed onions, and bay leaves from a simple pot of soup wove together into the fragrance of home, a fragrance Madeline had long forgotten. Her grandmother set a bowl of soup in front of her, urging nothing, asking nothing. Madeline lowered her head, the spoon clinking against the earthenware bowl as her eyes burned. "Eat something warm," was all her grandmother said. After the soup, her grandmother laid out an old blue quilt in a small back room with a window that looked over the cactus garden. Above the bed hung a worn rosary, and beside it a wooden table with a vase of wildflowers. She placed a small bowl of warm water with a lemon slice on the bedside. Those small gestures, unspoken, said everything. Here, you are safe. Before turning off the light, her grandmother stood in the doorway, her eyes kind and steady. "If you're hungry, call me. If not, just sleep. Tomorrow we'll talk." Madeline nodded, her throat tight. When the door closed softly, she sat on the bed, her hand cradling her belly. Tears fell, quiet and unhurried, tears long overdue for a heart that had endured too much silence. "You're not alone anymore," she whispered, as though fastening a promise to the night sky. Morning in the village woke slowly. Roosters crowed long and low. Brooms swept courtyards with soft swishes, and once again the aroma of tortillas filled the kitchen. Her grandmother handed her an apron. "Eat first, then help me shell the corn. Busy hands make a calm heart. Busy hands make a calm heart." The simple phrase untangled knots inside Madeline. She finished the tortilla, sipped cinnamon tea, and felt steadied by the quiet strength of ordinary things. They stepped out into the courtyard. Packed brown earth, pots of aloe, a small cement water tank, and a clothesline stretched across the morning sun. Her first tasks were to shake out the old clothes, hang them to dry, and then sit with her grandmother to shell corn. The kernels clattered into a metal basin, each sound a steady rhythm, pulling her back to the present. When the sun rose higher, her grandmother pointed to the small room beside the kitchen. "My old sewing machine. If you want to mend or stitch, use it. People here always need clothes repaired. You won't lack work." Madeline touched the smooth, time-worn wood, and a wave of closeness rushed through her. A way to live, a way to raise her child, with her own two hands. The day passed with small tasks, sweeping the yard, watering cacti, mixing cornmeal, and folding sun-warmed laundry. At noon, her grandmother led her to the village well, showed her how to draw water, and pointed out the small clinic nearby. Everyone they passed greeted her grandmother with nods and closed smiles. No gossip, no probing questions. Here, silence was respected, like the wind. By evening, a middle-aged woman appeared at the gate, leaving 2 shirts with torn shoulders and a dress with a broken zipper. Mrs. Morales accepted them, then turned to Madeline. "Can you mend these?" Madeline nodded. "Yes, I'll do it carefully." That night, they sat together on the porch, her grandmother patching a blue blanket, Madeline repairing the dress, the steady sound of needles pricking fabric filling the quiet. The desert sky spread above them like a bowl of ink studded with stars. The breeze carried the scent of earth and dried chilies. Her grandmother spoke slowly, as though addressing the darkness itself. "Here, people don't talk much. But when they love for a long time." Madeline lifted her gaze to the sky, feeling wrapped in warmth. She didn't know what the future would shape into, only that each stitch she sewed was a step forward, a deeper breath, a little less fear. She began making lists, doctor's appointments, the money earned from mending, meal plans for the days she would feel sick. The neat, steady handwriting felt like she was stitching her life back together. A few days later, her grandmother took her to the clinic. The small room was plain, its plastered walls fading, the fetal Doppler old but clean. A nurse placed the device on Madeline's stomach and smiled. "Listen." A faint rhythm filled the air, quick, steady, like a bird tapping at a window. Madeline held her breath. Her grandmother squeezed her hand. In that moment, all the world's noise fell away. Only the tiny heartbeat thudding against her chest, against her grandmother's hand, against the faded walls. Madeline cried. This time her tears were like rain, the rare desert rain that carried seeds of green. On the way home, her grandmother said nothing more, only, "You don't need to be strong alone. When you're tired, lean on me. When you're afraid, tell me. The rest, leave to heaven." Madeline laughed through her tears. "You never say much, Grandma, but every word is true." "Talking too much makes you thirsty," her grandmother shrugged, lips curving faintly. The first weeks in the village unfolded like this. Few words, many tasks, less panic, more deep breaths. Madeline learned to accept gourds from neighbors and offer back careful stitching. Learned to hang laundry with the wind to avoid the dust. Learned to feel enough even with a half-empty wardrobe and coins that barely filled her palm. She cut scraps of fabric, piecing together a small quilt in blues and soft yellows. Each stitch a greeting to the future. "My child, this is your blanket." One night on the porch, Madeline opened her notebook. She wrote, "Day, a new beginning. Write less, live more. When afraid, touch my belly. When sad, listen to the wind." Then she lifted her gaze to the deep night sky. Somewhere far away was the man she had left behind. The pain still lingered, but it no longer ruled her. It sat quietly, like a fresh scar tender to the touch, yet proof she had lived, endured, and escaped. "We'll be all right," Madeline told her shadow. "I'll learn to be strong, but not hardened. Gentle, but not weak." The wind rustled the string of red chilies on the porch, crackling like a small round of applause. Inside, her grandmother cleared her throat and called out, "Come in, child. Tomorrow will be sunny." Madeline rose, folded the half-sewn baby quilt, and rested her hand on her belly once more. Here, in this quiet village, under the desert wind and star-filled sky, she began her new journey, a life of hidden refuge, of working with her hands, of healing through each breath while nurturing a heartbeat that was already teaching her the true meaning of courage. Soul Stories fam, if you're watching on another channel, come home to us at Soul Stories, where tens of thousands of listeners and sharers come together. After the divorce, Lucas thought he would feel relieved. The court, the signatures, the red seal, all of it shut like a slamming door. But when he returned to the hollow mansion, he realized he was standing at the edge of a bottomless void. The white-painted walls echoed his footsteps back at him, cold and empty like metal scraping against metal. He went to work earlier, stayed later. Lunch was gulped down at his desk, thick coffee, the computer screen glowing through the night. Friends invited him to bars and he agreed to go. Another time, he agreed to climb hills. A few fleeting affairs followed. Pretty faces under dim lights, laughter at the right cues, hands pressed lightly on his shoulders. But whenever he returned home, the lingering perfume on his collar smelled like a reminder of emptiness. No one belonged here. Some nights he would turn on every light in the house and blast the music loudly. But when the song ended, silence swallowed everything again. He shut the music off, let the darkness crawl up the chairs, coat the ceiling, fill the hollow in his chest. Sleep was worse. He woke to the smallest creaks or to blurred dreams of her turning away, closing the door, never looking back at him again. Once, while cleaning the bedroom, Lucas found Madeline's sweater wedged under the bed. He pulled it out, brushed off the dust, laid it on the mattress, then picked it up again, pressing his face into the fabric's faded scent. No more jasmine, just the faint, sun-soaked smell of cotton. And yet his heart clenched as if gripped. He laughed a rough, broken sound, hating himself for being shaken by a ghost of fragrance. In the days after, he began throwing things out. Picture frames, books he had never read, throw pillows, Madeline once carefully arranged on the sofa. He stuffed them into boxes and sealed them with tape, as though discarding things would discard memories. But once the lid was shut, the memories only poured back heavier, thicker. That day it rained. Lucas climbed the ladder into the attic to check for leaks. Dust and the smell of old wood hung heavy. As he pushed boxes aside, he noticed a faded brown shoebox, unmarked, untaped. Its lid gaped slightly, as if waiting for a hand to open it. He set it down and crouched. Inside was a pale blue fabric-covered notebook. No name, only a small nick in the corner like the scar of a box cutter's slip. Lucas hesitated. It clearly wasn't his, but his fingers touched the cover, opened it, as if guided by someone else. The first page held only one line, in small black ink. Write less. Live more. The handwriting was familiar. Neat. Steady. Madeline's. He turned the pages. Each entry was a day, or just a few lines, sometimes a single sentence. No long complaints, no bitterness. But each word was like a drop of water tapping steadily against his frozen surface. He came home late today. I brewed coffee and left it on the table. It went cold. I poured it out. It's all right. Tomorrow I'll make more. Rainy night. I had a fever. He changed the towel for me all night. I heard my heart still had sound. I bought carnations. He said nothing. It's all right. I bought them because I like them. I tried smiling less, talking less. I stayed silent more to see if anyone noticed. No one did. It's all right. It's all right. Those two words returned again and again, like a haunting refrain she used to keep herself from falling apart. Lucas swallowed hard. Suddenly he felt like a trespasser, stomping across someone's sunlight with muddy boots. But his hand kept turning the pages. I put my hand on his chest while he slept. Heard his heartbeat, low and slow. I thought it was a home. But when he woke, the home locked its doors. A drop of rain leaked through the roof, splattering onto Lucas's forehead. He didn't wipe it away, didn't even blink. He sat still, reading more, letting each short line pierce him like a needle threading into old torn fabric. But the more it stitched, the more he realized he wasn't fixing a torn cloth. His hands were too rough, fraying every strand. On another page, the handwriting was firmer than usual. If one day I leave, it won't be because I stopped loving. It will be because I finally love myself too. Lucas closed the notebook. In the silence, he listened to the rain above, softening from a steady downpour to scattered taps, then fading away. He suddenly wanted to apologize, but to whom? The notebook? The sky? Or her? And how could he, when all she ever needed was a man who stayed, and all he had ever known was how to shut doors? He rested his forehead against the cool fabric-covered surface. Regret thickened in his chest, solid and heavy, like a stone lodged behind his ribs. It wasn't sharp pain. It was a weight so crushing that even exhaling was exhausting. That night, Lucas fell asleep on the sofa, his new ritual of self-punishment. The house was dark. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the wind still howled through the trees. He drifted into broken sleep, and a white door appeared in his dream. Cold steel handle, the stinging smell of antiseptic, a long hallway, rows of plastic chairs, the clock ticking, slow, slow, unbearably slow. The door swung open. Madeline stepped out. Her face was pale under fluorescent light, lips washed out like petals crushed by rain. She looked at him, silent. On her coat hem, a shadowy stain spread like damp darkness. "It's done," she said flatly. "I ended it." Lucas lunged forward, grabbing her wrist. Cold. Empty. When he opened his hand, there was no pulse. He looked down at his palm smeared with a vague red mark. The ticking turned into the thin wail of a newborn, then dissolved like someone twisting down the volume knob. He jolted awake, sweat soaking his shirt. The room was still, with no hallways, no white light, and no antiseptic smell. Only wood and dust floating in the dim glow from the curtains. Lucas sat up, clutching his head. The dream lodged in his throat, leaving the metallic taste of fear. He stood, went to the kitchen, and set water to boil. The kettle hissed, steam curling like pale smoke. He reached for the wrong cup. Not his, Madeline's. Its porcelain rim is worn faintly from countless sips. He set it back quickly, his palm burning as though it had touched coal. The next day, Lucas carried the notebook downstairs and placed it in the top drawer of his desk. He thought if he could see the blue fabric cover, he would remember the way Madeline loved quiet, steady, unadorned, without defense. He even began writing a few lines himself, not for her, but for him. "Tonight I came home at 9 p.m. No one waited. I stood at the door longer than usual before turning the key. I once believed duty was enough. It isn't. Duty is a frame. Love is the house. I never built a house." That evening, he didn't go to the bar. He drove around the city instead, past a bakery still open late, past the empty bus terminal. On a stone bench near the station, a girl slept against her suitcase. He suddenly thought of some night. Perhaps Madeline too had sat like this, clutching her suitcase, deciding to leave his life forever without a glance back. The thought drilled into his chest like an auger. Back home, he opened the closet and found Madeline's old sweater, her thin scarf she always wore when the wind changed. He folded them carefully and placed them on the highest shelf. Small, silent things, but each one proved someone had once been here. Someone who lit lamps, brewed coffee, bought carnations, and wrote, "It's all right to carry all the weight of what was not." Lucas shut the lights and sat in the dark. Regret was no longer an idea. It had become his way of breathing, his new heartbeat, slower, heavier. And beneath it all, the dream of the white hallway waited for him again, like an unanswered question. Had everything truly been ended? Or was the only thing he ended the last chance to stay? He closed his eyes, listening to his chest. The solitary beat echoed like a hammer against a hollow door. Somewhere far off, he thought he heard another rhythm, small, fast, persistent, like a bird tapping on a window. But when he opened his eyes, there was only the wind whistling through the roof, and a ruined man sitting in his vast empty mansion, waiting for something he couldn't even name. 7 months later. The city entered its dry season, the central square blazing like a giant silver disk, reflecting the sun. Fountains shimmered and children shrieked with laughter as they chased pigeons. Lucas strolled slowly under rows of maple trees, his steps aimless as they had been on recent weekends. He only wanted to escape the house, which was filled with too much darkness. Stopping at a small pastry stall, he caught the scent of warm butter and cinnamon rising from the oven, a sweet and comforting aroma. He held a cup of coffee, his hand slightly trembling, his eyes drifting over the crowd. And then he froze. Across the street at another bakery, a woman in a pale blue cotton dress was speaking to the shopkeeper. Her hand rested instinctively, protectively over her belly. A round, unmistakable belly. Her hair was tied back neatly, a few strands falling over her ear, her face thinner than before, but carrying an oddly serene calm. The cup slipped from Lucas's hand. The lid popped off, dark liquid splattering onto the pavement. The faint crash sounded in his ears like thunder. All other noises around him fell away. drowned until only one image remained. Madeline. Her name struck his mind without thought. His heart plummeted. Memories crashed down. The white hallway, her words, "I ended it." His hands stained with something red and indistinct. The journal pages filled with endless, "It's fine." But the truth laid bare before him was undeniable. Madeline had never had the abortion. She had been carrying this child for 7 months alone. He moved forward, every step faltering like treading on old mistakes. He stopped just a few paces away. Madeline was paying, a thin smile on her lips, then turned and walked past him without a glance. Lucas saw it clearly, her face worn and fragile, but in her eyes was steady resolve, a thorned kind of peace belonging only to those who had endured long storms. He wanted to call her name. His lips parted, then shut again, not because he feared she wouldn't hear, but because he feared she would. Madeline crossed near the fountain, paused to fix her sandal strap, her hand again coming to her belly. That simple gesture pierced Lucas's chest like a knife. He sank onto the curb, burying his face in his hands. The truth tore him open. Her lie, "I ended it," had been to save the baby, and to save him too from his own cowardice. A boy darted past, his toy stone rolling against Lucas's shoe, jolting him back to the present. He lifted his head. Madeline had gone farther, her slender figure fading into the crowd. Lucas sprang up, ready to chase her, but hundreds of words swirling in his mind shattered to dust. "I'm sorry. Are you all right? I'll be here." All was meaningless if she no longer wished to hear them. He dropped heavily onto a bench, clawing at the peeling paint. In his head, the dream of the white hallway returned, but this time the door opened, not to a cold clinic. It opened into a sunlit room, with a crib and a quilt of blue and lemon yellow. But without him. Left outside the door, he only heard a baby's cry, not shrill, but sharp, strong, insistent like the tiny heartbeat he had once abandoned. Lucas clenched his face, drawing in a breath that cut his chest. Number. He couldn't let this slip away again. He couldn't let cowardice win. He pulled out his phone, her number gone. No address, only faint clues. A name, Morales, a sun-scorched desert with cacti and red chili ristras swaying on porches that she had once mentioned. He watched her silhouette vanish, then made his choice. He would find her, even if it meant combing through bus stations and community clinics. Even if all he could do was sit beneath a porch roof, haul water, change light bulbs, or guard a cradle, he would do it. Not out of duty, but because at last he understood. Love is not a promise, it is presence. Lucas rose and headed toward the parking lot. On the way, he stopped at a tourist information booth for a map. A kind volunteer marked a few small southern villages with maternity clinics. He snapped a picture, thanked her, and then returned to the bakery to buy 2 warm cinnamon loaves. He wasn't sure why, perhaps because cinnamon always reminded him of that rainy night he had kept watch at her bedside. Back at his car, he opened the glove compartment and set the blue cloth journal on the passenger seat. Write less. Live more. He whispered it. All right. He drove out of the lot, tires rolling over patches of broken sunlight. In the mirror, the city shrank, the glowing square fading into a tiny box. But Madeline's image by the fountain, hand on her belly, grew larger inside him, filling every void. Merging onto the highway, the sky opened like a door flung wide. Lucas lowered the window, letting the hot wind rush in, carrying the scent of asphalt and a faint trace of cinnamon. He didn't know if forgiveness waited at the end of the road, or just another slammed door. But this time he accepted, not knowing what he was getting into. Because between knowing and being there, he chose being there. Lucas gripped the wheel tightly. The journey had begun, and somewhere far away, in a quiet village, red chili peppers still crackled in the wind, waiting for a man to knock, carrying no promises, only his hands. Thank you for being part of Soul Stories. If you're listening on another channel, come back to the official home so you can continue our love journeys together with the Soul Stories family. The red dirt road stretched out under wheels coated in fine dust. Lucas stopped the old rental car in front of a small adobe house, its tiled roof mottled beneath the New Mexico afternoon sun. The wooden gate was weathered, the fence tilted, and a few chicks scratched at the earth near the porch. The smell of dry soil mixed with the scent of tortillas baking somewhere in the village carried on the breeze. He stepped out, his palms slick with sweat. Months of torment had brought him here, where Madeline was hiding. He knocked on the door. It opened, and Lucas found himself staring into the deep black eyes of Mrs. Morales, the silver-haired woman, small in frame, but sharp as a blade. She was silent for several seconds before her rough, husky voice cut through, without a hint of courtesy. "Why are you here? Haven't you made that girl suffer enough?" Lucas lowered his head, his voice hoarse. I know I was wrong, but I need to be here. Not to make excuses, but because of the baby." Mrs. Morales folded her arms, her cold gaze sweeping him from head to toe, as if weighing whether the man before her carried even a trace of sincerity. At last she sighed, tired but firm. "If it weren't for the child, I would have slammed this door in your face. You can stay, but hear me well. No promises, no pretty words, only action. Madeline doesn't need a man who talks well. She needs peace, and the child needs a father if you're still worthy of being one." Lucas nodded quickly, choking on his thanks. She gave no reply, only pointed to the back of the house. "Small room at the end of the hall. Clean it yourself. Noon." In the kitchen, Madeline placed a stack of fabric on the table when the sound of familiar footsteps echoed. She turned and her heart stopped. Lucas was standing there, thinner, more worn, but still the man who had once forced her to give up everything. Her eyes flared with fire. "You have no right to be here." She cut him off before he could speak. Lucas froze, struggling to stay calm. "I didn't come to cause trouble. No." Her voice shook, but her words were resolute. "You forced me to have an abortion, signed the divorce papers, and abandoned me. You have no right to stand in front of me again. So leave. Now." The air thickened. Lucas swallowed hard. He wanted to say, "I'm sorry," to beg for a chance. But in the end, silence was all he managed. He gave a faint nod, retreating toward the door. His shadow disappeared behind the wooden fence. Madeline stood rooted, her hands gripping the table's edge until her knuckles turned white. For a moment she thought she had won, pushed the past out of her life. But her heart still pounded wildly because his sudden presence had unearthed everything she had tried to bury. Evening fell. Madeline walked out to the porch to fetch some dried vegetables for the chickens. As she rounded the garden corner, she froze. Lucas was still there. He had shed his tailored blazer, wearing only a white dress shirt now wrinkled, its cuffs smeared with dust. His Italian leather shoes were splattered with mud, a strange contrast to his figure kneeling by the old fence, clumsily gripping a hammer as if he were a man unaccustomed to manual work. Beside him sat a rusty bucket of nails and an old hammer Mrs. Morales had left out. Madeline bit her lip. "I told you to leave," she said, her voice sharp with bitterness. Lucas paused, turning toward her, his eyes tired but steady. "I know, but I can't go. At least, let me do something useful." He lowered his head again, continuing to drive nails into the wood, as if needing no further explanation. Madeline stood silent. The evening wind lifted her hair, carrying the scent of dry earth and the clucking of chickens around the yard. Her chest tightened. Part of her wanted to shout, to chase him away again. But another part, fragile, trembling, stirred at the sight of this man, for once silent yet persistent. She turned her back, walking into the house, hiding the turmoil in her eyes. But deep inside, Madeline knew his return would not be pushed aside as easily as she had thought. Morning in the village began with the crowing of roosters and pale red lights spilling over the distant mountains. For Lucas, each day at Mrs. Morales' ranch felt like stepping into a different world. No constant buzzing of phones, no suffocating business meetings, only sweeping leaves, fixing fences, or hauling sacks of chicken feed. His phone still rang with calls from his father, the company, and old friends in the city, but Lucas left it in the drawer unanswered. Each time his father's name lit up on the screen, his chest ached with the knowledge of what it meant. Come back now. The company needs you. Don't waste your time in that backwater. He had obeyed those commands his whole life, but this time he turned the phone off. This time he had decided this was where he needed to be. Mrs. Morales, who had been wary at first, now watched him in silence. She saw a man no longer dressed like a polished city executive, but with his shirt sleeves rolled up, arms tanned by the sun. Clumsy, awkward, yet persistent. He made no promises. He simply worked. Lucas patched the leaky roof, carried firewood into the kitchen, and sometimes spent whole afternoons cleaning out the chicken coop. He did it not for thanks, but because it was the only way he knew to say, "I'm not walking away again." Madeline saw it all, though her face betrayed nothing. She remained silent, kept her distance. Only in fleeting moments did her eyes soften, moments she quickly turned away from whenever Lucas caught them. One afternoon, Madeline reached up toward the top shelf for a jar of cornmeal. Her belly made her movements awkward. Lucas stood nearby, hesitated for a second, then spoke in a low, careful voice. "Madeline, may I help you?" It was the first time he had said her name like that, with respect, not command. Madeline froze. She hesitated, then stepped aside. Lucas took the jar down and set it gently on the table. Such a small gesture, yet it stirred her heart. She didn't say thank you, only bowed her head and carried on. But deep inside, she knew the ice had cracked just a little. Another day, Lucas struggled with the outdoor faucet. His hands, once used to signing million-dollar contracts, fumbled with wrenches and screws. Water sprayed everywhere, soaking his expensive white shirt. He flinched, stumbling, drenched. Madeline, watching from the porch, couldn't help herself. A laugh escaped, light, clear, startling even to her. How long had it been since she had laughed like that? Lucas looked up, eyes wide, meeting the rare sound of her laughter. For a heartbeat, the space between them felt smaller. Madeline turned away quickly, hiding the smile still lingering on her lips. But Lucas knew something had shifted. On the day of her checkup, Madeline walked toward the old pickup. She froze when she saw Lucas standing there, holding out the keys. "You don't have to come," she said firmly. Lucas's reply was quiet. "I don't want to miss this." She wanted to refuse, but sighed. She knew she couldn't stop him if he was determined. And so they rode together down the dusty road to the small-town clinic. Silence heavy, broken only by the hum of the old engine. Inside, Madeline lay down as the doctor pressed cold gel onto her belly. The monitor flickered, showing the tiny figure shifting inside her. The steady rhythm of a heartbeat filled the room. Lucas sat beside her, hands clenched tight, his eyes blurring. For the first time, he saw the child he had once tried to reject. Tears welled, spilling down his face. He tried to hide them, but Madeline saw. In that moment, she felt both pain and warmth. Pain, remembering how he had once forced her to let go. Warmth because, for the first time, she saw his eyes trembling with love for something beyond himself. On the drive back, neither spoke. Yet the silence was different now. Not the heavy emptiness of before, but a fragile bridge, thin, delicate, linking two hearts that might still find their way back together. That night, Madeline sat on the porch, her hand resting on her belly as she gazed at the star-filled sky. Lucas sat a few steps away, not daring to come closer, only quietly being there. In that silence, Madeline realized his presence no longer felt like a burden. It was like a bridge slowly being built, one brick at a time, toward a trust she had once thought gone forever. That night, the wind shifted, carrying the dry chill of the desert and the rustle of cacti behind the house. Madeline turned on the small bed, her hand instinctively resting on her belly. A sharp pain suddenly tightened from her back around to her stomach, like an invisible rope pulling taut, then releasing. She held her breath, counting 10, 11, 12 before it eased. She had barely closed her eyes when another wave struck, deeper, stronger. "Grandma," Madeline whispered, her voice breaking. Mrs. Morales sprang up quickly, as if she had been waiting for this hour for weeks. She pressed a hand to her granddaughter's forehead, then to her belly, measuring the rhythm of the contractions. Her wise eyes showed no panic. "It's time, mija. Breathe the way I taught you. Slow, deep." Lucas was still awake outside on the porch, checking the gate lock. The old woman's voice cut across the dark yard. "Lucas!" He ran in, heart hammering. Madeline's eyes flickered toward him, wet and resolute. Another contraction seized her, so strong her vision blurred. He stammered, clumsy, desperate. What What should I do? The car, Mrs. Morales ordered. The bag is ready. Call the hospital. Lucas's hands shook as he dialed, his voice hoarse. We're on our way to the maternity ward, Madeline Morales, full term. Contractions every 3 to 4 minutes. Stay calm, drive safe, the nurse's steady voice came through. We'll be ready. Within minutes, Mrs. Morales helped Madeline into a loose dress and soft shoes. Lucas slipped his arms around her, and for the first time in his life, he understood the meaning of holding gently. Every step she took felt as if she carried an entire world within her. He opened the car door, eased her in, buckled the seatbelt, then ran to the driver's seat. The road at night shimmered under the headlights. The desert stretched on both sides like endless black ribbons. Lucas gripped the wheel tightly, eyes locked on the white line. Each time Madeline gasped, he counted her breaths, repeating like a mantra. Deep breath. Exhale. Good. I'm here. From the back seat, Mrs. Morales laid a hand on his shoulder. Steady, son. It was the first time she had called him by that name. The neon glow of the rural hospital appeared like a bright island. Lucas braked hard at the ER entrance, rushed out for a wheelchair, and lifted Madeline carefully. The sliding doors opened, the smell of antiseptic washing over them. A nurse hurried forward. Mother's name? Madeline Morales. Companion? Lucas faltered, then steadied his gaze. I'm the father. The words fell heavy, solid, like a vow. The nurse nodded, jotting it down, her tone professional yet warm. All right, Dad. Right this way. Mrs. Morales stayed behind in the waiting area, hands folded, lips moving in an old prayer. She sat still, like the stone pillars that had weathered storms on her porch. Inside, the obstetrician and 2 nurses worked with practiced efficiency. The monitor traced the baby's heartbeat in blinking dots. The steady beep, beep sounded like a tiny song. Madeline gripped the bed rail, sweat running down her temple. Lucas stood by, offering his hand. She squeezed so hard his fingers went numb, and he felt nothing but grateful to share even a fraction of her pain. Madeline, the contraction is rising, the doctor said gently but firmly. Breathe as we practiced. That's it. Lucas bent close, whispering in her ear. I'm here. Look at me. Good. You're doing so well. She looked at him. For a split second, through the waves of agony, their eyes met no past, no cruel words, only the present burning bright like fire. Time stretched like molten sugar. 1 hour. 2. The pain surged in relentless waves. Madeline felt she might shatter into 100 pieces. Once she gasped, I can't do this. Yes, you can, Lucas answered, his voice fierce with conviction. Breathe. Look at me. The doctor checked, then nodded. All right, Madeline. It's time. When I count, push with all you have. The next contraction hit like a storm. Madeline bit down, summoned every ounce of strength, and eyes shut tight. Voices layered around her, the nurses count. 1, 2, 3. The doctor's encouragement. Perfect. Lucas's ceaseless whisper. You're amazing, Madeline. I'm here. She gasped, head falling onto his shoulder. He wiped her forehead with a warm cloth, his own hands trembling. Another wave came, and she cried out, pushing as if giving her entire soul. The air thickened, and sound itself seemed to vanish. And then, a new sound split the silence. A cry. Sharp, clear, powerful. The first cry of life, ringing like a bell. A nurse exclaimed softly. The doctor lifted the tiny body, briskly cleaned, and clamped the cord. A healthy baby girl. Madeline broke down, tears streaming not from pain, but from searing joy. Lucas stood frozen, every nerve stripped bare, then suddenly a light. When the nurse placed the child on Madeline's chest, warm skin against skin, the baby's small hands opened and closed, her cries softening into whimpers. Madeline cradled her, chin brushing the damp crown, her eyes glowing with a light Lucas had never seen before the light of a private star. The nurse turned to him with a smile. Do you want to hold her, Dad? He nodded, lips trembling. His hands received the impossibly light bundle that weighed heavier than his whole heart. The baby stilled in his arms, eyes half shut, mouth pursing as if searching for a story. Lucas drew a sharp breath to steady his sob. "Hello?" His voice cracked. "Daddy's little girl." 2 tears dropped, warm on her tiny hand. He kissed her forehead gently, intoxicated by the scent of milk and newborn skin. A small band circled her wrist, her mother's name, now with the word "Father" added. He stared at it, realizing a door he had fled for so long had opened, leaving no way back. The doctor finished the final steps, voice warm. "Mother and child are both stable. Congratulations to the family." Family. The word shot through Lucas like a current, both tender and electric. He looked up at Madeline. She was watching him hold their daughter, eyes wide with emotion, her lips curved into a weary, unguarded smile. "Thank you," she breathed, faint as a sigh. "No, I should thank you," he answered, voice husky. "Thank you for keeping her. For keeping a chance for me." Madeline didn't reply. She only reached up, brushing a tear from his cheek. A simple gesture, soft as a quilt laid over a cold night. Mrs. Morales set a bouquet of carnations on the table, quietly admiring the pink, sleeping child. Her eyes softened as she asked, "What will her name be?" The room stilled, every breath caught. Lucas froze, turning to Madeline. He knew he had no right to decide. That right was long lost. His chest tightened as he waited. Madeline gazed down at the little angel in her arms. Tiny fingers curled, her small head nestled against her chest. A single tear slipped from Madeline's eye, not of pain, but of sweet, unbelievable joy. She drew a deep breath, whispered, "Emma." The name floated like desert wind, yet filled the entire room. Lucas swayed, tears breaking free. He repeated it, his voice trembling like a prayer. "Emma, Daddy's girl." He said nothing more. No claim, no intrusion, only repeated her name with all the reverence and love he had just discovered in himself. Madeline glanced at him. Her eyes were tired, still cautious, but for a flicker of a moment, another light shone there, as if she saw a man remade, no longer the one who had forced her to throw away what mattered most. Emma stirred, gave a soft cry, then fell back into peaceful sleep. Lucas looked at the scene and felt that at last, after so many barren years, his heart had found a home. The little house on the New Mexico plain was no longer as silent as before. The desert wind still whistled through the wooden fence, but now it mingled with the sharp cries of a newborn, the hurried footsteps in the night, and the soft laughter when someone finally managed to soothe her. Each day, Lucas felt like he was learning an entirely new language, the language of being a father. Those first nights he sat by the crib, eyes red-rimmed yet patient, fumbling with powdered formula in the kitchen. Milk spilled over the counter. He wiped it quickly, shaking the bottle until his hands trembled. Emma only cried harder until Madeline appeared, snatching the bottle, her face caught between irritation and amusement. "Let me do it." "You're hopeless at this." Lucas scratched his head, embarrassed yet determined. "Then teach me so I can do it next time." Madeline froze for a moment. She had never heard him say words like that before. Back then, he had always believed small chores belonged to women, while he stayed silent or simply walked away. But now his eyes were earnest, like a student who truly wanted to learn. He also learned to change diapers. At first, he held the diaper backwards, fumbling so badly that Emma wailed at the top of her lungs. Madeline laughed, really laughed for the first time in months, without restraint. Lucas turned to her, his face lighting up, and smiled too, without a trace of shame. He knew then, it was in these small, clumsy moments that he had the chance to prove he could stay not with promises, but with action. One night, Emma cried endlessly, refusing to sleep. Madeline was exhausted, her body still frail from childbirth, her eyes hollow with fatigue. Lucas lifted the baby, pacing the dim room, humming a tune he barely remembered from somewhere off-key. Awkward. Not beautiful, but steady. Slowly, Emma calmed. From the bed, Madeline watched his silhouette swaying beneath the lamplight, and for the first time, she saw the image of a true father in him. The change was not only in Lucas. The house, once filled with heavy silence, now pulsed with new rhythms. The scent of milk, the powdery sweetness of baby lotion, the hiss of water warming on the stove each night. The little tasks that had once weighed solely on Madeline were now shared by another pair of hands. One afternoon, Mrs. Morales cradled Emma, then called them both over. Sunlight slanted through the window, gilding her silver hair. She placed Emma back into Madeline's arms, then turned her stern but gentle gaze toward Lucas. "She belongs to you now." Madeline stiffened, hugging Emma closer. Lucas sat beside her, his hand trembling on the arm of the chair. He didn't dare touch Madeline, but inside he felt something new, a sense of responsibility, and even a sense of honor. Mrs. Morales studied them for a long time before sighing. "I've raised a family my whole life, and I know one thing. A child needs more than milk and a warm bed. She needs a true home. If the two of you still want to try, this is your last chance." Then she stood and left, her words hanging in the quiet. Madeline glanced down at Emma, then sideways at Lucas. His eyes brimmed with hope, remorse, and something like devotion. But the wounds inside her had not yet healed. "I haven't forgiven you," she said softly, firmly. Lucas nodded, his own eyes wet. "I know. I don't expect forgiveness right away. All I ask is the chance, for you to see that I truly have changed." Madeline stayed silent. Emma stirred, her tiny fingers clutching the fabric of her mother's blouse. That fragile heartbeat softened her. Without replying, she shifted and handed the baby to Lucas. He held Emma as if for the first time, hands shaking. He pressed her to his chest. She blinked once, gave a faint sigh, then drifted back to sleep. Madeline watched him, and something unfamiliar rose inside her. A sense that maybe a family was beginning to take shape. Not whole yet, but possible. That night she lay beside the crib, listening to Emma's steady breaths and Lucas's quiet footsteps as he moved in and out, changing a diaper, mixing formula, tucking the blanket more securely. The house that had once groaned under silence now carried a new rhythm, the rhythm of a family. Madeline closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "Perhaps." And for the first time in years, her sleep came easier, lighter like a fragile bridge beginning to span between two hearts once broken. Time passed, and winter in New Mexico softened into warm spring days. In the little adobe house, life had found a new rhythm. Emma's cries and babbles, Madeline's gentle lullabies, and the steady footsteps of Lucas pacing the floor with the baby in his arms each night. The man who had once bound himself to glass-walled offices and million-dollar contracts now devoted himself to the smallest of tasks. He learned to change diapers quickly, discovered how to make Emma giggle by pulling ridiculous faces, and even cooked dinner with his own hands. Even if it was just a simple scrambled egg, it was full of effort. And whenever Madeline was weary, he would quietly carry Emma out to the porch, giving her a rare pocket of peace. Madeline saw it all. Not once, not twice, but hundreds of times his patience, his care, his tenderness. Slowly the walls around her heart began to crack, though pieces of her still ached, unhealed. That night, the full moon hung high, spilling silver light over the old brick courtyard. Emma slept soundly in her crib, her breath soft and steady like a quiet melody. Madeline sat on the porch, a thin shawl draped around her shoulders, her gaze drifting toward the distant sky. Lucas stepped outside, one hand hidden behind his back. His heart pounded wildly, as if he were 20 again. He stood still for a moment, then moved toward her, his eyes brimming with a sincerity he had never shown before. He knelt down. Madeline startled, lifting her head. The moonlight revealed his face no longer cold, no longer shielded by pride. What remained was simply a man heavy with regret and overflowing with love. "Madeline," his voice was husky, "I hurt you. I left you to endure everything alone when you shouldn't have had to. I don't ask you to forget. I don't dare claim I deserve this. But I beg you, forgive me. Let me stay by your side and with our child for the rest of my life." He lifted his hand and opened a small box. Inside was a silver ring, plain but gleaming beneath the moon. He hadn't chosen the dazzling diamond of their first marriage, because this time he wanted a symbol not of duty, but of humility and truth. Madeline was speechless. Her heart trembled violently. The lonely months, the scars not yet fully healed, the tears she had shed, all of it still existed. But in front of her was a man transformed not by words, but by countless days of patient action. She lowered her gaze to Emma, sleeping peacefully in her crib, her tiny lips curved as if in a faint smile. Madeline saw it clearly. This was her family, and she knew it was time to open her heart. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she nodded, whispering, "Now." "Yes." Lucas choked back a sob. His hands shook as he slid the ring onto her finger. Their hands clasped tightly this time, not as a contract, but as a vow of love. He pulled Madeline into his arms, holding her as if terrified of losing her again. Madeline buried her face against his shoulder, her tears dampening his shirt. But for the first time in years, her heart was light, not burdened, at peace. Inside the house, Mrs. Morales stood at the doorway, a shawl draped around her shoulders, her eyes shining. She said nothing, only smiling with quiet satisfaction. The smile of a woman who had witnessed her granddaughter find happiness again and seen a man finally learn how to stay. Above them, the moon spread its silver light across the courtyard. Emma slept soundly, her tiny hands resting beside her face, an innocent witness to a new beginning. Lucas, Madeline, and Emma sat together, arms encircling one another beneath the gentle glow of the moon. No more cold silences, no more distance, only a small family, stitched back together by love and forgiveness. And in that moment, they knew this happiness would last, because it was not built on obligation, but on love that was finally true.